What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. For those of you watching for the first time, I'm a lawyer trained in Chinese foreign policy, and I currently work in China in an executive role, and part of my job requires that I follow the big macro developments coming out of China. That's what we discuss on here. These episodes are very casual. I just film this on a Friday night at my own place, but everything that I say here I'd be comfortable providing to a paying client whose business relied on following China. So if you're interested in being as informed as they are, maybe consider subscribing. For everybody else, it's good to see you. Thank you very much, everybody, for your feedback from the last episode a few days ago. I think it seems that most people like the 2 a week format. Some have said they prefer 1 a week. I'm just going to keep playing around with it. I always am interested in your feedback and what works best for you guys. It was probably good that I split it this week, otherwise this episode would probably be something like 40 minutes, and I think that's just getting too unreasonable. Of course, a few days ago we touched on Mulan, we touched on the border situation with India, and we talked about the Australian journalist that fled China. If you're interested in any of those stories from just 2 days ago, click up here. Otherwise, this episode is going to be a very international relations, diplomacy, geopolitical, neighborhood policy type episode. There's going to be no specific domestic stories, but instead we're going to look at more updates with the situation on the Indian border. Very serious, grave situation there. We're going to look at a couple of very important political and economic developments in the context of the EU-China relationship, and 3 major developments in the context of the most important bilateral relationship in the world today, of course, China-US. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. As always, if you enjoy the episode, please hit that like button. It's a huge help. I always appreciate your support at Patreon. The link is below if you're interested. But to be honest, just watching and commenting and liking is all the help I really need. Thank you again in advance. Now, with all that said, let's jump into this week's China update. Now, of course, we need to start with the China-India, the Sino-Indian border along the Himalayas or Himalayan mountain ranges. We talked about this 2 days ago. If you want to go in detail with what happened with the shots that were fired, what's been said from both sides, and some basic analysis, hit up the last episode just up in this corner. Otherwise, we're just going to do a couple of updates since the last episode 2 days ago. Chinese state media reports that People's Liberation Army bombers, air defense troops, and paratroopers have been deployed to the plateau region around or near the line of actual control. On Wednesday too, the state-run Xinhua news agency in China provided what I think is a pretty authoritative and concise articulation of the official position, at least in Beijing, and what it wishes to communicate to the Indian side publicly and to the international community. So it's worth quickly looking at here to get that official position. It said, quote, "The Indian sides moved to first fire shots to threaten the Chinese border patrol personnel in the western sector of the China-India boundary is a serious military provocation of an egregious nature. Since the beginning of the year, India has breached bilateral agreements and important consensus many times in border areas, attempted to unilaterally change the status quo by force, and undermined peace and stability in the border region. The responsibility lies entirely with the Indian side." End quote. The more nationalistic state-run Global Times was less diplomatic in some of its comments this week, in one report writing, quote, "If India wants war, China will oblige. Let's see which country can outlast the other." End quote. On Wednesday too, India and Japan announced that they have signed a pact for the, quote, "reciprocal provision of supplies and services between their armed forces." End quote. On Thursday, defense analyst Azan Tarapur wrote an opinion in the English language, the Hindu newspaper, saying, quote, "China has no interest in launching a major conventional invasion, but this is not just a typical probe either. Rather, its quick land grab looks increasingly permanent, like an attempt to change the border without triggering a war. This fait accompli leaves India with 2 awful choices: either start a war by launching its own reprisal attack, or do nothing and accept a new status quo." End quote. On Thursday, the Indian and Chinese foreign ministers had a private 2.5-hour long meeting at the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization event in Moscow, Russia. After the meeting, the 2 ministers of foreign affairs released a joint statement saying, quote, "The 2 foreign ministers agreed that the current situation in the border area is not in the interest of either side. They agreed, therefore, that the border troops on both sides should continue their dialogue quickly disengage, maintain proper distance, and ease tensions. End quote. I am sure we will be talking about this still next week. Until then, I will keep my eye on developments for you guys. Speaking of foreign ministers, let's have a look at Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, and his adventures of late. As I said, Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has traveled to Russia to participate in a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Council of Foreign Ministers. He will also be visiting Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Mongolia until the 16th of this month. Of course, he was also recently in Europe. We covered his trip here over 2 weeks. There are a few European-China developments since then, one of which touches specifically on words and actions that he made during his time in the EU. So we're going to briefly touch on them here. So we all remember, of course, the fallout over the Czech trip to Taipei, as well as Wang Yi's threat while he was visiting the EU that he would pay a heavy price, comment later criticized by the German foreign minister during the same trip. This week, the mayor of Prague, who went with Mr. Vystrčil to Taipei, expressed in an interview that the trip to Taiwan demonstrated that China had, quote-unquote, little means of punishing foreign states that ignore its threats. He said, quote, "The world is seeing that China can do little to hurt the Czech Republic. Everyone can now see that Beijing does not fulfill its promises and is an unreliable partner. I believe the net result will be positive for the Czech Republic. Taiwan is a much better partner. It's a technologically advanced democratic state. China, a communist dictatorship, has promised lots but delivered little." End quote. Moving to investment now in the EU, we remember that in Paris a few weeks back, Wang Yi advocated strongly for the quick conclusion of a massive EU-China investment agreement currently under negotiations on both sides, as well as a free trade agreement between China and the EU. The EU will hold a EU-China summit on Monday, this coming Monday, conducted by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, which, according to the European Chamber President, it will seek to be, quote, decisive in order to see how far and how much political capital can be spent in order to get this investment agreement to conclusion before the end of the year, end quote. With cooling attitudes in Europe towards China, it seems increasingly unlikely that the investment agreement can be concluded by the end of this year, though we shall see. After all, even if human rights, wolf warriors, and Hong Kong-related concerns were taken off the table, long-term economic concerns remain. These include asymmetric market access, false technology transfer, IP theft, and prejudicial corporate treatment Chinese companies, especially SOEs. These still all remain, and these by themselves are problematic for many Europeans in these negotiations. Outside of trade and investment too, it seems that several European nations are rethinking their China policy generally. The pan-European think tank, the European Council on Foreign Relations, in a report published this week entitled "The New China Consensus: How Europe is Growing Wary of Beijing," argues, quote, "Since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, there has been a new convergence of EU member states' assessment of the challenges China poses to Europe. The Sino-European economic relationship lacks reciprocity, and there are mounting concerns within the EU about China's assertive approach abroad, as well as its breaches of international legal commitments and massive violations of human rights in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Overall, there is growing skepticism about the future trajectory of the relationship, which provides an opportunity for a more robust and coherent EU policy on China. In its remaining months, the German Council presidency could use this moment to create institutional structures to improve the EU's capacity to act. In doing so, it will be critical to ease concerns about Franco-German dominance of the China agenda, especially those of Eastern and Southern European countries." End quote. I've actually included that report in the link below. Check it out. There are a couple of cool different graphs and images that you can play around with on it that breaks down different countries positions on China and how close certain positions are. It's worth checking out. Okay, now of course we need to move on to the most important bilateral relationship in the world, that is US-China. There are three big developments that I want to talk about. This episode, we'll take them on one at a time. The first are just basic policy moves that have been made in both countries towards the other. On Monday at a Labor Day news conference at the White House, US President Donald Trump expressed the possibility of decoupling with China, saying, quote, "So when you mention the word decouple, it's an interesting word," end quote. On Tuesday, officials with the US Customs and Border Protection told reporters the United States will move to block imports of cotton and tomato products from China's Xinjiang region over, quote, "allegations that they have been produced with forced labor," end quote. On Wednesday, the acting head of the US Department of Homeland Security said the United States is blocking visas for certain Chinese graduate students and researchers, saying, quote, "We are blocking visas for certain Chinese graduate students and researchers with ties to China's military strategy to prevent them from stealing and otherwise appropriating sensitive research," end quote. It's being reported this week that more than 1,000 Chinese nationals have had their visas revoked by the United States since June, a development Beijing on Thursday called, quote, "outright political persecution, racial discrimination, which seriously violates the human rights of these Chinese students," end quote. Also on Wednesday, in a speech at ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Asia and China Foreign Ministers meeting, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi condemned the United States for its, quote, "militarization of the South China Sea," end quote. His Asian colleagues, however, did not share his view. So a few days ago, we covered the story about the Australian journalists who had to flee. They were the last accredited Australian journalists in China. They had to flee the country. They took refuge in one's case, Beijing, at the embassy, the Australian embassy, in another's case, the Shanghai consulate. After several days of high-level negotiations, they're allowed to leave the country. Well, on Wednesday, in response to the United States State Department calling on China to, quote, "stop the intimidation and harassment of foreign journalists," end quote, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian told reporters, quote, "The US officials' fabricated criticism of China is a perfect example of the guilty party blaming the victim by distorting facts. The issues she accused China of are non-existent. The reporting environment in China is open and free. International journalists' rights to conduct reporting is fully protected by law. The Chinese government provides a wide variety of opportunities for foreign press," end quote. The following day, the US State Department released a statement saying, quote, "Today the Chinese Communist Party's main propaganda newspaper, the People's Daily, refused to run an op-ed written by our ambassador in Beijing, citing a litany of grievances," and went on to say, "In contrast, in our vibrant and confident democracy, Chinese government officials have enjoyed the ability to talk directly to the American people and provided its government's views through our free media. China's ambassador to the United States, Cui Tiankai, alone has published 5 op-eds this year in prominent US news outlets such as the Washington Post and Politico, and given exclusive interviews to the likes of CNN and CBS. China's foreign ministry and state-owned propaganda organs like the Global Times and China Daily regularly use free access to American social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook to attack our policies, our way of life, and the very system that protects their ability to speak freely. They do this in other democracies too. If Communist China is sincere about becoming a mature power and strengthening relations with the free world, General Secretary Xi Jinping's government would respect the right of Western diplomats to speak directly to the Chinese people, allow foreign journalists back into China, and stop the intimidation and harassment of investigative journalists, foreign and Chinese, who strive to uphold the integrity of the Fifth Estate to serve the public good," end quote. A spokesperson for the People's Daily responded soon after with, quote, "The article sent by the US Embassy in the name of the ambassador was full of loopholes and seriously inconsistent with the facts. It also did not meet the standards of the People's Daily, a prestigious, serious, and professional media for selecting and publishing articles," It concluded by saying, quote, People's Daily strongly opposes provocations made by the US and is urging it to stop harming the safety and rights of Chinese journalists in the United States and attacking the Chinese press, end quote. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian added his own statement saying, quote, if the Chinese government, as the US did, provided you with an article that seriously distorted the facts and attacked your country and requested you to reply the next day and promised to post it without any changes, could you do it? End quote. Of course, US social media and traditional media do post articles from the Chinese government which are critical of the United States without any changes, hundreds of times every day. Okay, now for some bright spots on a otherwise pretty gloomy outlook in the bilateral relationship. Let's look at the business relationship between the two countries. This week, the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai published its 2020 China Business Report, and it's worth quoting parts of it here. Quote, this year's report shows that despite a rise in US-China tensions and a slowing economy in 2019, American businesses in China remained profitable, with 78.2% of companies reporting profits last year, marginally ahead of recent years. However, the global COVID-19 pandemic outbreak in early 2020 has impacted investment plans as well as profit expectations for the rest of the year. Nearly half, 49.2%, of companies expect their China revenues to be lower than 2019 revenues, although a surprising 32.5% of companies expect 2020 revenues to be greater than 2019. The report also found that fewer than 4% of respondents, this was the Shanghai Chamber of Commerce, were relocating some productivity capacity back to the US. 4% were planning, of those that were interviewed, were planning to move some capacity back to the US. The majority, more than 70%, had no plans to relocate. Now, this is quite different than what is being observed with Japan or Japanese companies, with the Nikkei Asian Review reporting this week that the program to promote domestic manufacturing had about, it's in yen obviously, but in US dollars, $2.07 billion US dollars earmarked in the supplementary fiscal 2020 budget. In the first round of applications of companies that wanted to enjoy some of the special subsidy, which ended in June, the government approved 57 projects, 57 companies, over half of the 90 applications. The second round of applications, which closed in July, got over 1,670 applications requiring 11 times the funding allocation in the budget. But back to America. While few American companies are expressing a desire to leave at this point, they nonetheless seem less willing than before to invest in China. Quote, 78.6% of companies reported no change in their investment allocations, a 5.1% point increase compared to 2019. However, the percentage of those planning to increase their investment in China dropped from 47.2% in 2019 to 28.6% this year. Okay guys, that's our China update for this week, second of two I guess. Like I said, tell me in the comments below what your feedback is regarding this new sort of format. It sounds like you guys do enjoy splitting it up, but I do always want to hear your thoughts on presentation and content. As always, I will see you guys next week, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay sane, and I'll see you next time on China Update. So guys, there's I couldn't really fit this into the episode. There was this report on gaming consumption in China, and I thought it was really interesting. I was breaking down the data, and here's a little piece of trivia for you guys. As of this year, approximately 130 million Chinese people play games for 30 hours or more every week, which is insane. I barely have enough time to sleep. I do not know how 130 million Chinese people are spending more than 30 hours a week playing games, but there you have it, your piece of trivia for this week.